What happens when royalty collides with Hollywood ambition? It doesn't just make headlines, it creates a global spectacle. And over the past few years, the world has watched what feels less like a family disagreement and more like a full-scale media chess match between Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and the institution they left behind. When the couple announced in early 2020 that they were stepping back from senior royal duties, it wasn't framed as rebellion. It was framed as independence, financial freedom, mental peace, a new beginning. But what followed wasn't quiet freedom. It was a battle over narrative control, one side choosing interviews, documentaries, and memoirs, the other choosing silence. And somewhere in that clash, public perception began to shift. Because this wasn't just about leaving the palace. It became a test of whether personal branding could outmaneuver a 1,000-year-old institution. And the results have been anything but predictable. When Harry and Meghan made their announcement, it landed like a thunderclap. The decision to step back from royal duties, quickly dubbed Megxit by the press, triggered shockwaves through the UK and beyond. At first, there was sympathy. Many saw a young couple overwhelmed by media pressure. Supporters argued they were choosing mental health over tradition. Critics, however, questioned the timing, the tone, and the practicality of carving out a half-in, half-out royal role. The palace responded with controlled restraint. No explosive statements, no public sparring, just structured negotiations that ultimately resulted in the couple losing official royal roles and military appointments. Then came the promise. They would become financially independent. That phrase carried weight. It hinted at billion-dollar potential, Hollywood connections, media deals, global speaking tours. For a moment, it felt like the beginning of a modern royal power couple stepping into celebrity dominance. But independence comes with exposure, and exposure comes with scrutiny, and that scrutiny would only intensify. When the multi-million-dollar partnership with Netflix was announced, it signaled ambition. This wasn't just about stepping away from the monarchy. This was about building a media empire. The streaming giant reportedly signed the Sussexes to produce documentaries, scripted series, and inspirational content. For supporters, it was validation. For critics, it was proof that royal status was being converted into commercial leverage. Then the docuseries dropped. It delivered emotional interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, and direct commentary about royal life. It broke streaming records in its first week. But alongside the viewership came backlash. Some viewers felt it revealed too much. Others argued it rehashed old grievances. The series amplified polarization. Supporters praised the transparency. Critics accused them of monetizing private family tensions. And perhaps most damaging of all, a new narrative began forming. That the Sussex brand depended heavily on conflict with the royal family. That perception planted a seed. Because when your brand identity is built on telling your side of a dispute, what happens when the audience grows tired of the dispute? And fatigue was coming. If the Netflix deal was bold, the Spotify fallout was bruising. In 2023, the Sussexes' partnership with Spotify ended abruptly. The podcast project had launched with major promotion, but production delays and limited output raised eyebrows. Then came the comment that ricocheted across headlines. A Spotify executive publicly referred to the couple as grifters. The word exploded across social media. Memes multiplied. Critics seized on it as validation of their doubts. Even neutral observers began asking tougher questions. Was the Sussex brand overpromised and underdelivered? It wasn't just the deal ending. Hollywood deals collapse all the time. It was the tone of the fallout that shifted perception. The grifters label stuck in online discourse far longer than anyone expected. And in the attention economy, labels can be lethal. The conversation quietly evolved from brave departure to business misstep. That pivot marked a turning point. Because while headlines in California grew louder, something very different was happening in London. While interviews aired and podcasts sparked debate, the royal family largely stuck to its oldest strategy: say less. The phrase, never complain, never explain, has long been associated with royal protocol. And whether intentional or instinctive, the palace leaned into that approach. No detailed rebuttals, no televised responses. Instead, the focus remained on public duties, charity work, and ceremonial appearances. Prince William quietly increased his public engagements. His approval ratings in the UK steadily climbed. He projected stability, a future king grounded in continuity rather than controversy. Meanwhile, King Charles III balanced modernization efforts with tradition, navigating a complex transition after Queen Elizabeth II's passing. His reign began under intense scrutiny, yet he avoided being pulled into direct public feuds. The contrast was stark. On one side, interviews, memoirs, streaming platforms. On the other, ribbon cuttings, diplomatic visits, minimal commentary. And sometimes, silence speaks louder than rebuttal. As weeks turned into months, public discourse began to reflect that contrast. The more one side explained, the more the other seemed composed, and that imbalance reshaped the battlefield. At the heart of the tension lies a deeper question. Can royal identity function as a personal, commercial asset? The Sussexes positioned themselves as advocates, producers, storytellers. But their global recognition undeniably came from royal association. That created a branding paradox. Critics argued that continuing to use royal titles while pursuing private commercial ventures blurred lines. Supporters countered that they were entitled to leverage their platform like any public figure. But monarchy operates on symbolism, tradition, public trust. When that symbolism intersects with corporate deals and media contracts, discomfort emerges, especially in the UK, where public funding and national identity are tied to the crown. It wasn't about legality, it was about optics. And optics, in the digital era, can define reality. By 2024 and beyond, polling suggested a noticeable dip in UK favorability toward the Sussexes. In the United States, opinions remained more divided. The cultural lens differed. But globally, one pattern became clear. Attention alone doesn't guarantee admiration. Sometimes, the louder the narrative, the quicker the fatigue. And fatigue changes everything. Public opinion doesn't shift overnight. It moves slowly, then all at once. In the months following the Spotify fallout and the release of Harry's memoir, Spare, polling in the UK began showing a noticeable decline in favorability toward Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Headlines in British tabloids grew sharper. Commentators who once defended the couple began asking tougher questions. Even some neutral observers started wondering whether constant revelations were helping or hurting. Meanwhile, approval ratings for Prince William remained comparatively strong. Stability was selling. Predictability felt comforting. And in uncertain times, the public often gravitates toward what feels steady rather than dramatic. In the United States, the reaction was more mixed. Some audiences still viewed the Sussexes as victims of an outdated institution. Others saw them as celebrities navigating the same reputation risks as any Hollywood figure. But even there, something subtle was happening. Attention remained high, yet enthusiasm seemed to cool. The problem with living in the spotlight is that the spotlight never turns off. Every interview, every appearance, every project becomes part of a larger narrative arc. And if that arc feels repetitive, audiences start tuning out. The question shifted from, were they justified, to what's next? And that's when the real challenge began. Because in the digital age, relevance requires reinvention. The modern monarchy doesn't just exist in palaces, it exists on timelines. TikTok clips, YouTube breakdowns, Twitter threads, reaction channels dissecting body language frame by frame. Every statement becomes content. Every silence becomes speculation. The Sussex saga evolved into a full-blown online ecosystem. Supporters and critics formed digital camps. Commentary channels built entire brands around analyzing their moves. Algorithms rewarded outrage. Balanced takes rarely went viral. Extreme opinions did. And that created a distortion effect. The loudest narratives often overshadowed nuance. A single headline could trigger days of trending debates. Old interviews resurfaced. Out-of-context clips circulated. Rumors spread faster than official statements ever could. Meanwhile, the royal family's restrained approach translated into fewer viral moments, but also fewer digital firestorms. It's a fascinating contrast. In an era where constant engagement is currency, the palace chose selective visibility. Fewer words, fewer interviews, carefully controlled messaging. And strangely, that restraint may have shielded them from algorithm fatigue. Because while controversy drives clicks, it also accelerates burnout. By 2025 and into 2026, observers began noticing a recalibration. The Sussexes appear to scale back the intensity of personal revelations. Public appearances leaned more toward philanthropy and less toward personal grievance. The tone softened. The messaging shifted toward community initiatives and future-focused projects. It wasn't dramatic, it was strategic. But rebuilding trust is slower than losing it, and perception, once cracked, doesn't reset instantly. While headlines churned across the Atlantic, a different narrative was unfolding in Britain. With the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles III stepped into a historic role under intense global scrutiny. The monarchy faced questions about relevance, modernization, and public support. Through it all, William's presence grew more prominent. He focused heavily on mental health campaigns, homelessness initiatives, and environmental causes. The messaging was consistent. Service first, personal drama last. Whether intentional or simply instinctive, his approach reinforced the idea of continuity. In contrast to the high-profile interviews given by his brother, William rarely engaged publicly in family disputes. When asked, responses were measured, brief, controlled. That difference created a powerful image dynamic. One brother seemed to be fighting for narrative dominance. The other appeared to be waiting for time to do the work for him. And time, historically, has favored institutions that endure. As conversations about the monarchy's future intensified, William increasingly became the face of its next chapter. Younger audiences who once questioned the crown's relevance began seeing him as a transitional figure, someone who could modernize without dismantling tradition. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't viral, it was steady. And steady can be surprisingly persuasive. So where does this leave the Sussex brand? They remain globally recognizable. Their name still commands media attention. Any announcement, whether a podcast return, a documentary project, or a public appearance, generates headlines within minutes. But recognition isn't the same as influence. The early narrative centered around liberation from an oppressive structure. Then it evolved into storytelling. Then into business scrutiny. Now it seems to hover in an uncertain space between activism, entertainment, and legacy. Can they pivot fully into media production without constant royal comparisons? Can they detach their identity from palace conflict and build something entirely new? That may be the defining test of the next phase. Because institutions don't compete like individuals do. The monarchy doesn't need quarterly profits. It needs continuity. It doesn't rely on trending topics. It relies on tradition. The Sussex model, on the other hand, operates within the modern attention economy. Fast cycles, constant reinvention, measurable engagement. 2 systems, 2 timelines, 2 strategies. And they're colliding in real time. In the end, this isn't just about contracts, interviews, or even public feuds. It's about narrative power. Can personal storytelling reshape an institution that has survived wars, scandals, and centuries of upheaval? Or does the institution simply absorb the shock and continue forward? The Sussexes chose transparency. The royal family chose restraint. One strategy generates immediate headlines. The other builds slow-burn credibility. History will ultimately decide which approach leaves a lasting imprint. But here's the bigger question, and it goes beyond any single family. In a world ruled by algorithms and instant outrage, is silence a weakness or the ultimate power move? Because sometimes the loudest voice in the room wins the moment, but the quietest strategy wins the decade. And that may be the real story unfolding before our eyes.